Judge Harrison was seconds away from humiliating the beautiful blonde woman in his courtroom when everything went wrong. The stunning defendant he'd been calling a coward had just whispered something that made a 4-star general sprint from the Pentagon to personally salute her. What Judge Harrison didn't know was that the gorgeous woman he was destroying wasn't just any veteran, she was Colonel Sarah Phoenix Mitchell, and her classified call sign was about to end his career forever. Welcome to Silent Hero Stories. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where in the world are you watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, hit that subscribe button. Now, let me tell you how we got to this moment. The San Francisco Municipal Court had seen thousands of cases, but none quite like the one unfolding in Courtroom 7B on this gray Tuesday morning. Judge Robert Harrison, known throughout the legal community for his theatrical cruelty and particular enjoyment of humiliating defendants he considered beneath his notice, was about to encounter someone whose true identity would shatter every assumption he had ever made about power, authority, and respect. At the defendant's table sat a woman who appeared to be everything Judge Harrison despised: young, beautiful, and apparently entitled. Sarah Mitchell, 28 years old, possessed the kind of stunning beauty that stopped traffic, platinum blonde hair that caught the courtroom's fluorescent lighting like spun gold, piercing blue eyes that seemed almost too perfect to be real, and a face that belonged on magazine covers rather than in criminal court. But it was precisely her beauty that had triggered Judge Harrison's contempt. In his twisted worldview, attractive women who found themselves in his courtroom had obviously relied on their looks rather than intelligence or character to navigate life, and when those looks failed them, they deserved whatever punishment he chose to inflict. The case itself was absurd, a minor traffic citation that should have been resolved with a simple fine. Sarah had been driving home from a VA appointment when a wealthy businessman's son, high on cocaine and driving a Ferrari, had run a red light and nearly killed her. When police arrived, the responding officer, who owed his job to the businessman's political connections, had written the citation to Sarah instead of the real culprit. It was textbook corruption, the kind of small-town injustice that happened every day across America. But for Sarah Mitchell, a woman who had lived her entire adult life by an unbreakable code of honor and integrity, accepting guilt for a crime she hadn't committed was absolutely impossible. "Miss Mitchell," Judge Harrison said, his voice dripping with the condescension that had made him infamous among public defenders, "let me ask you again. Do you find these proceedings amusing, or are you simply too blonde to understand the gravity of your situation?" The insult hung in the courtroom air like poison gas. Sarah's public defender, a young man named David Chen who had been practicing law for less than 2 years, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had been assigned to Sarah's case that morning and knew nothing about her background beyond what appeared in the sparse file: unemployed, living alone, no apparent family or community connections. What David didn't know, what nobody in that courtroom could have guessed, was that the beautiful woman sitting calmly beside him was one of the most decorated combat veterans in United States military history, holder of classified clearances that exceeded those of most generals, and the recipient of medals that couldn't be publicly acknowledged because the missions that earned them remained state secrets. Sarah didn't respond to the judge's insult. She sat perfectly still, her blue eyes focused on the American flag hanging behind the bench, her posture unconsciously military despite her civilian clothes. She wasn't looking at Judge Harrison, she was looking through him, into memories of places where real authority was measured not by the power to humiliate civilians, but by the courage to protect them. "Your Honor," David Chen began nervously, "my client understands completely, does she?" Harrison cut him off with a dismissive wave. "Because from where I'm sitting, I see a woman who has shown nothing but contempt for this court. A simple traffic citation, Miss Mitchell. Failure to yield. And you have dragged this out, refusing the plea bargain, forcing this to trial, wasting taxpayer money so you can sit there looking pretty and hoping your appearance will convince me to go easy on you." Sarah's hand, resting on the defendant's table, twitched almost imperceptibly. Her thumb moved in an unconscious gesture, rubbing against a spot on her wrist just below the cuff of her blouse. Hidden beneath the fabric was a tattoo that no civilian would recognize but that would make any military personnel immediately stand at attention: a stylized phoenix rising from flames, surrounded by the words "death" from above in letters so small they were nearly invisible. It was the unit insignia of the most classified Special Operations Squadron in United States military history, a group so secret that their existence was denied by the Pentagon, and their members carried no identification beyond the tattoo that marked them as legends among those who knew what to look for. Judge Harrison interpreted Sarah's silence as defiance, and it infuriated him. He was accustomed to breaking defendants with his verbal assaults, reducing them to tears or angry outbursts that justified even harsher sentences. But this beautiful blonde woman seemed completely unmoved by his attacks, as if his words were meaningless noise rather than the pronouncements of judicial authority. "Look at me when I'm speaking to you," Harrison commanded, his voice rising with frustrated anger. Sarah's blue eyes shifted to meet his gaze, and for a moment, Harrison felt something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine unease. There was something in those eyes, a depth, a hardness, a quality of absolute certainty, that suggested this woman had seen things that would destroy his understanding of reality. But the feeling passed quickly, overwhelmed by his arrogance and his determination to establish dominance over someone he assumed was just another entitled civilian trying to avoid consequences. "That's better," Harrison said with false satisfaction. "Now, Miss Mitchell, let me explain something to you. This is my courtroom. These are my rules. And in my courtroom, pretty girls don't get special treatment just because they're used to men doing whatever they want." David Chen winced at the blatant sexism, but he knew better than to object. Judge Harrison was notorious for finding creative ways to punish attorneys who challenged his authority, and David's legal career was too young to survive Harrison's retaliation. "People like you," Harrison continued, warming to his theme, "seem to believe that batting your eyelashes and looking helpless will solve all your problems. That society owes you special consideration because you won the genetic lottery. Well, let me tell you something, sweetheart, in this room, your looks mean nothing. In this room, I am the authority, and you are just another defendant who needs to learn some respect." He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers with theatrical authority. "I've seen your type before. Pretty girls who coast through life on their appearance, never learning personal responsibility, never facing real consequences. And when reality finally catches up with them, they expect someone else to fix their problems." Sarah's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. She was remembering another courtroom, thousands of miles away, where she had testified in a classified hearing about a mission that had saved the lives of 47 American hostages. The senators on that panel had treated her with the respect due to her rank and her service record, understanding that they were in the presence of someone who had risked everything for her country. The contrast between that hearing and this travesty was so stark it was almost surreal. Then, she had been Colonel Sarah Phoenix Mitchell, Special Operations Pilot, recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, and Purple Heart. Today, she was just another pretty face being humiliated by a small-minded judge who had never risked anything more dangerous than a paper cut. "I understand you're unemployed, Miss Mitchell," Harrison continued, consulting his file with obvious relish. "Living alone, no family support, no community ties. A classic case of someone who never learned to take care of herself because she always expected others to do it for her." What the file didn't show, what it couldn't show, was that Sarah's unemployment was actually involuntary medical leave following her last classified mission, during which she had been shot down behind enemy lines and spent 6 days evading capture while coordinating airstrikes that decimated an entire terrorist training facility. The mission had been so successful that it had crippled enemy operations throughout the region, but the official record listed her status as temporarily inactive. "Your Honor," David Chen tried again, "Miss Mitchell is a veteran. She served her country with distinction. I don't care if she was a general," Harrison snapped, his face reddening with anger. "In this courtroom, she is a defendant and I am the judge. Her military service, whatever it was, does not give her a free pass to disrespect this court." He turned his attention back to Sarah, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "So tell us, Miss Mitchell, where exactly did you serve?" "Let me guess, some cushy administrative position, filing papers and answering phones. Maybe you were one of those military recruiters, using your looks to convince young men to sign up." Sarah's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. In her mind, she was back in the cockpit of her specialized aircraft, flying a night mission over hostile territory with surface-to-air missiles exploding around her like deadly fireworks. She could feel the familiar weight of her helmet, hear the calm voices of her squadron mates over the radio, remember the satisfaction of completing another impossible mission and bringing everyone home alive. "Let's hear about this great, honorable service you believe entitles you to sit here in silent contempt," Harrison goaded. "I'm sure it was very demanding work, making coffee, organizing files, maybe entertaining the troops during their downtime." The sexual innuendo was unmistakable, and David Chen finally found his voice. "Your Honor, that's completely inappropriate." "Mr. Chen," Harrison roared, "you will sit down and be quiet, or you'll be finding yourself in contempt of court alongside your client." David sank back into his chair, his face flushed with helpless anger. He looked at Sarah, expecting to see tears, rage, or at least some reaction to the judge's verbal assault. Instead, he saw something that chilled him: absolute calm. Sarah looked like someone who had faced far worse than an abusive judge and survived. Judge Harrison was enjoying himself now. He had found his rhythm, and he was building toward his favorite part of any proceeding, the moment when he crushed a defendant's spirit completely. "The truth is, Miss Mitchell," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I think you're a fraud. I think you're one of those women who puts on a uniform for a few months, takes some photos for social media, and then spends the rest of her life trading on fake military credentials." He stood up, pacing behind the bench like a predator circling wounded prey. "I've seen it before, pretty girls who join the military not to serve their country, but to find a husband or get college money. They do the minimum required service, probably never leave whatever safe base they're assigned to, and then spend decades pretending they're heroes." Sarah's hand moved again, unconsciously touching the place where her tattoo lay hidden. In her memory, she could hear the voice of Master Sergeant Rodriguez, her crew chief, calling out targets during a particularly difficult extraction mission. "Phoenix, we've got 27 friendlies on the ground, surrounded and taking heavy fire. You're their only hope." She had been their only hope that day, and she had gotten every single one of those soldiers out alive, despite flying through a gauntlet of enemy fire that had damaged her aircraft so badly it barely made it back to base. For that mission, she had received her second Silver Star, though the citation couldn't mention the classified details that made the rescue so remarkable. "You know what I think, Miss Mitchell?" Harrison continued, completely oblivious to the magnitude of his mistake. "I think you're a coward hiding behind a fake military record, hoping that people will give you respect you haven't earned." The word coward hit the courtroom like a physical blow. David Chen gasped audibly. Several spectators in the gallery shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Even the court stenographer looked up from her machine with shock. But Sarah Mitchell didn't react at all. She continued to sit in perfect stillness, her blue eyes now focused on something beyond the courtroom walls, something that Judge Harrison's limited imagination could never comprehend. She was remembering the night everything changed, the mission that had earned her the call sign Phoenix and the recognition that would forever mark her as one of the most elite pilots in military history. Her aircraft had been shot down over enemy territory during a rescue operation, and she had spent 3 days wounded and alone, coordinating airstrikes via emergency radio while enemy forces searched for her. But she hadn't called for extraction. Instead, she had used her position to direct rescue operations for an entire company of Marines who had been cut off and surrounded. For 72 hours, despite a broken arm and shrapnel wounds, she had been the eyes and ears of a massive rescue operation, calling in precision strikes that eliminated enemy positions and cleared escape routes for ground forces. When extraction finally came, she had refused to leave until the last Marine was safely aboard the rescue helicopter. The enemy had been closing in on her position, and rescue crews estimated she had less than 5 minutes before capture or death when she finally allowed herself to be evacuated. The mission had saved 84 American lives and had been so remarkable that it remained classified years later. The Medal of Honor she had received for that action sat in a locked safe in her apartment, along with commendations signed by presidents and generals whose names appeared in history books. Judge Harrison, completely unaware that he was verbally assaulting one of America's greatest war heroes, was building toward his climax. "You see, cowardice comes in many forms," he said, his voice taking on the tone of someone delivering profound wisdom. "Sometimes it's running from battle. Sometimes it's refusing to take responsibility for your actions. And sometimes it's sitting in my courtroom, trading on fake military credentials, hoping your pretty face will save you from the consequences of your own bad choices." David Chen couldn't take it anymore. He pulled out his phone, shielding it with his legal pad, and began typing frantically. His brother-in-law was a sergeant at the nearby Presidio military base, and David knew he had connections throughout the military community. If Sarah really was a veteran, maybe someone could verify her service and put a stop to this judicial abuse. His message was simple: emergency situation. Need immediate help verifying military service record for Sarah Mitchell, possibly served in special operations. Judge is calling her a coward in open court. Something is very wrong here. He hit send and slipped the phone back into his pocket, praying that someone, somewhere, would take his message seriously. At the Presidio of San Francisco, Sergeant First Class Michael Torres was finishing his daily reports when his phone buzzed with David's message. He read it once, then again, his expression growing more serious with each word. The name Sarah Mitchell didn't immediately ring a bell, but the phrase special operations combined with coward triggered every protective instinct he had developed during 15 years in the military. Torres stood up from his desk and walked quickly to his commanding officer's door. Major Patricia Williams was known for her no-nonsense approach to military affairs, but she also had a deep respect for veterans and an understanding of how the military community protected its own. "Major," Torres said, knocking on her doorframe, "I need to run a service verification, priority urgent." "What's the situation, Sergeant?" "Civilian court in San Francisco. Someone claiming to be special operations is being called a coward by a judge. I need to verify service record for Sarah Mitchell." Major Williams looked up sharply. She had served long enough to know that accusations of cowardice against special operations personnel were not taken lightly by the military community. "Give me the details." Torres explained David's message while Major Williams accessed her military database terminal. She entered the name Sarah Mitchell along with various special operations designations, and her screen immediately flashed a security warning. "Sergeant," she said quietly, "this search requires clearance above my level. Whatever this woman's service record is, it's highly classified." She reached for her secure phone and dialed a number from memory. "This is Major Williams at the Presidio. I need an immediate priority verification for someone named Sarah Mitchell, possibly special operations. We have a situation involving civilian court proceedings." The response was immediate and electric. Within seconds, Major Williams found herself speaking to a colonel at the Pentagon who treated the call as if it were a national emergency. "Major, where exactly is this court proceeding taking place?" the colonel asked. "San Francisco Municipal Court, according to my source." "What's the nature of the proceedings?" "Traffic citation, sir. But the judge is apparently calling her a coward in open court." The silence on the other end of the line lasted so long that Major Williams wondered if the connection had been lost. When the colonel finally spoke, his voice carried an urgency that made her blood run cold. "Major, you need to listen to me very carefully. The person you're asking about is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, call sign Phoenix. She holds the Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, Purple Heart, and for a classified action, the Medal of Honor. She is one of the most decorated special operations pilots in United States military history." Major Williams felt the room spin around her. "Sir, did you say Medal of Honor?" "I did. And Major, I need you to understand something. The woman in that courtroom right now has saved more American lives than most entire battalions. If some civilian judge is calling her a coward, we have a situation that requires immediate intervention at the highest levels." "What are your orders, sir?" "I'm mobilizing a response team immediately. General Patricia Hayes herself will be flying from the Pentagon. In the meantime, I need you to get to that courtroom and observe. Do not intervene unless the situation becomes physically dangerous, but document everything that happens. This is now a matter of national concern." Back in the courtroom, Judge Harrison was reaching the crescendo of his verbal assault. "You know what I think your real problem is, Miss Mitchell?" he said, circling back to his favorite theme. "I think you're used to men taking care of you. I think you've never faced real consequences in your entire life because you've always found some man willing to fight your battles for you." Sarah's blue eyes flickered with something that might have been amusement. If Judge Harrison had possessed even a basic understanding of military culture, he might have recognized the look of someone who had fought battles that existed beyond his comprehension. Instead, he interpreted her slight smile as confirmation of his theories. "That's right," he said triumphantly. "You think this is funny? You think your pretty face is going to save you from responsibility? Well, let me tell you something, Miss Mitchell, in this courtroom, there's no man coming to rescue you. In this courtroom, you face the consequences of your actions alone." The irony was almost unbearable. Sarah had spent her entire military career rescuing others, pilots shot down behind enemy lines, ground forces cut off from support, civilians trapped in hostile territory. She had been the person others called when situations seemed hopeless, the voice on the radio that meant salvation was coming. Judge Harrison was now pacing freely, his confidence building with each unanswered insult. "I sentence you to 30 days in county jail," he announced dramatically. "Maybe that will teach you some respect for authority and some appreciation for the sacrifices real heroes have made for this country." David Chen shot to his feet. "Your Honor, 30 days for a traffic citation is completely excessive. Sit down, Mr. Chen, or you'll be joining her for contempt," Harrison roared. It was at that exact moment that the courtroom doors opened with quiet authority. Major Williams entered first, her dress uniform immaculate, her bearing unmistakably military. She was followed by 2 military police officers whose presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. But it was the third figure who made everyone in the courtroom hold their breath. General Patricia Hayes was a legend in military circles, a 4-star general who had commanded operations in 3 different theaters of war, a woman whose decisions had shaped American military policy for over 2 decades. Her presence in a civilian courtroom was unprecedented. General Hayes ignored Judge Harrison completely. Her attention was focused entirely on the woman at the defendant's table. She walked down the center aisle with the measured pace of someone whose authority was absolute and unquestionable. When she reached Sarah's table, General Hayes came to attention and rendered a salute so precise it seemed to cut through the air itself. "Colonel Mitchell," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "General Hayes, United States Air Force. It is an honor to see you again, ma'am." Sarah rose slowly from her chair, her movement suddenly revealing the military bearing she had been hiding throughout the proceeding. She returned the general's salute with equal precision. "General Hayes," she said quietly. "Ma'am." Judge Harrison finally found his voice, sputtering with confusion and outrage. "What is the meaning of this? This is a court of law. I am a judge. You have no authority here." General Hayes turned her head to look at Harrison, and her expression made the temperature in the room drop by 10 degrees. "You," she said in a voice that had commanded armies, "will be silent." She turned back to address the courtroom, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to speaking to Congress and presidents. "For the benefit of this court, and for you, Judge Harrison, let me clarify exactly who you have been addressing." She gestured toward Sarah with the respect due to a superior officer. "You are in the presence of Colonel Sarah Mitchell, United States Air Force, call sign Phoenix. The woman you have been calling a coward is the recipient of the Distinguished Service Cross, the Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Purple Heart, and for an action that remains classified, the Medal of Honor." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. David Chen felt tears spring to his eyes as he stared at his client, understanding for the first time why she had seemed so unaffected by the judge's verbal assault. General Hayes continued, her voice building with controlled fury. "Colonel Mitchell is a living legend in the United States military. She has flown over 300 combat missions in the most dangerous airspace in the world. She pioneered techniques for combat search and rescue that have saved thousands of American lives." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the stunned courtroom. On her most famous mission, her aircraft was shot down behind enemy lines. For 3 days, wounded and alone, she coordinated rescue operations that saved an entire company of Marines while evading enemy forces that were actively hunting her. She refused extraction until every single one of those 84 men was safely evacuated. General Hayes turned her gaze back to Judge Harrison, whose face had gone from red to ashen white. "Your conduct today has been noted and will be reported to the highest levels of both military and civilian authority. The woman you called a coward has done more for this country in a single mission than you will accomplish in your entire career." Judge Harrison was gripping his gavel so tightly his knuckles were white. I had no way of knowing." "You had no way of knowing," General Hayes repeated coldly, "because you were too busy making assumptions based on appearance and gender to treat a defendant with basic human dignity." For the first time since the proceedings began, Sarah Mitchell spoke to the court. Her voice was quiet but carried the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded in life and death situations. "Your Honor," she said, looking directly at Harrison, "respect isn't something that comes with a robe or a title. It's earned through your actions, day in and day out. Courage isn't about making speeches or wielding authority over people who can't fight back. Most of the time, it's about doing the right thing when it's difficult, when no one is watching, and when it costs you something." She paused, her blue eyes meeting those of everyone in the courtroom. "We all fight our own battles. We all serve in our own ways. Just make sure you understand whose service you're questioning before you pass judgment on their character." As she spoke, Sarah's mind flashed again to that terrible night over enemy territory, the moment when her aircraft was hit and she realized she was going down. She could still hear the voice of her wingman over the radio, "Phoenix, you're on fire. Eject. Eject." But she hadn't ejected immediately. She had stayed with her crippled aircraft long enough to guide it away from a village full of civilians, ensuring that her crash wouldn't harm innocent people. Only then had she ejected, beginning 3 days of hell that would define her forever. The promise she had made to those Marines, that she would get them home alive, hadn't been spoken lightly. It had been a sacred oath, The kind of commitment that separated true warriors from people who merely wore uniforms. General Hayes stepped forward and placed a respectful hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Colonel, let's get you out of here," she said gently. As they walked down the aisle together, followed by Major Williams and the military police, something remarkable happened. People in the gallery began to stand. One by one, they rose to their feet in a spontaneous tribute to someone whose service they had only just learned about but instinctively understood deserved their respect. Judge Harrison remained seated at his bench, utterly defeated, watching as his courtroom transformed into something resembling a military ceremony. His authority, his arrogance, his entire sense of power had been stripped away by the presence of someone whose authority came not from a title, but from a lifetime of genuine service and sacrifice. The case was dismissed before General Hayes's vehicle had left the courthouse parking lot. The fallout for Judge Harrison was swift and comprehensive. Video of the proceedings, recorded by the court stenographer and leaked to media outlets, went viral within hours. Harrison was suspended pending a full investigation by the State Judicial Commission. The video became a case study in judicial misconduct, and Harrison was forced to resign in disgrace. His legal career was over, his reputation destroyed by his treatment of someone whose service record represented the very best of American military tradition. But Sarah Mitchell, true to her character, refused all requests for interviews or public appearances. She wanted no fame, no recognition beyond what she had already received from her country. She simply returned to her quiet life, attending her VA appointments and maintaining the low profile that had always been her preference. Several weeks later, Judge Harrison appeared at Sarah's apartment door. He looked haggard, aged by the public humiliation and the loss of everything he had built his identity around. He stood there for a long moment, clearly struggling with what to say. "Colonel Mitchell," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "There's nothing I can say that would be adequate, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry." Sarah looked at the broken man standing in her doorway, seeing not the arrogant judge who had humiliated her, but a human being who had learned a devastating lesson about the consequences of his choices. She gave a single, slow nod of acknowledgement. "Judge Harrison," she said quietly, "we all make mistakes. The measure of a person isn't whether they fall down, it's whether they learn something when they get back up." Harrison nodded gratefully and turned to walk away. He had been given something he didn't deserve, forgiveness from someone whose grace under pressure had revealed the vast difference between true authority and the petty power of office. Sarah's story became a reminder that genuine heroes often walk among us unrecognized, their service and sacrifice hidden behind modest exteriors and quiet dignity. Her medals and memories remained private, but her example resonated with anyone who understood that real courage is most often displayed not in dramatic moments, but in the daily choice to do what's right regardless of personal cost. What they didn't know about Colonel Sarah Phoenix Mitchell could have filled multiple classified files. But what everyone learned that day was that assumptions based on appearance are not just wrong, they're dangerous. The beautiful woman they had dismissed as entitled and shallow had reminded everyone that heroes come in all forms, and that the most extraordinary people are often the ones everyone chooses to overlook.